Okay, so let's see. Great. Is it recording? Yeah, okay. Okay, so thank you for inviting me to be here and to give this talk. This is going to be a bit of a hybrid talk. So not only am I going to talk about the editorial and the publishing processes at Nature Research, but it's going to be put in the context of what a day-to-day is like and more about career trajectories and skills that might pop out at you as being needed or essential for this kind of job. So I'm going to start first of all with the overall makeup of the publishing landscape at this company. And I'm going to focus, however, on manuscript editors, which is what I am, and what our day-to-day and sometimes hour-to-hour will look like during the entire process of a paper's evaluation, along with some notes about how we evaluate each of these papers and how we make the decisions during the before a review, sometimes after review. And then I'll zoom back out to consider some of the skills that we think might make a good editor. Okay. So what we have at Nature Research are an entire team of in-house professionals. So right at the top left is us in-house manuscript editors for different journals, Nature, all of the Nature Research journals. So Nature Neuroscience, Nature Human Behavior, Nature Immunology, Nature Medicine, and so forth. We also have magazine editors. So these are people that talk more about news. So Nature Medicine have Nature news editors there. Nature also has Nature news editors there. That's what we refer as magazine editors. So more of the newsworthy things, not about the specific scientific details of research that the manuscript editors handle. The editorial administration is really just includes the chiefs of all the journals, plus the executive editors who are almost like the chief of the chiefs, right? They have a portfolio of journals, life sciences, physical sciences, and whatnot. They all have PhDs. A lot of them, if not all of them, have all been manuscript editors before, and they just move up to talk more about, learn more about the business and about the publishing side of these things. So they're further away from the science than manuscript editors. So the manuscript editor is the closest you will get to the science without actually doing it. The further up you go, the further away from science you are. The copy editors, now this is an important distinction I want to make. I do not copy edit your manuscript. I care about the science, I care about how it's communicated, but I don't care about your grammar. Except for when production teams, when we're about to accept a paper, will say, you can't have punctuations in a title, then I'll come in and care about some of your grammar and some of your language construction. But other than that, it's about the science and the communication of the ideas behind it. Once it's into production, we have art editors. Oh, and by the way, copy editors, some of them have PhDs. Some of them are biologists and scientists just like us, but they prefer to do copy editing instead because they get to see the polished product as opposed to guiding a paper through the pipeline. Then you have art editors who are professional. They don't have to have a science background, but it helps because they're drawing cells or action potentials. And production editors that we only interface when we want to know how an issue is going, a print issue or a monthly issue or a weekly issue. Okay, so about manuscript editors, we are all trained scientists. I think I said this at lunch. The minimum to become a manuscript editor is a full-time manuscript editor is a PhD. You must have it. The postdoc is encouraged, but not a requirement. And we have left the field. We are no longer actively doing research anymore because we've dedicated ourselves to doing scientific editing as a profession. We are independent and we take responsibility for our actions and for our decisions, meaning that, well, at Nature Neuroscience, we do not have an editorial board. We solely rely on consulting with the other editors there. And sometimes we will ask for advice from experts in the field who could be potential reviewers for a paper, but we make the decisions before review, after review, appeals, everything at that point, and we stand by it. We retain close ties to the community and prioritize time out in the field. Well, that was definitely so before the pandemic. We're still trying to figure out how to do this during the pandemic, but it means that at least at Nature Neuro, we were expected to do 4 to 5 conferences a year, plus 2 to 3 departmental visits like this. So we would tack them on to conferences or do them separately. But that meant that we were traveling a lot, maybe half the year for about a week at a time. And that's a lot of work. But that gets us right here. We're learning about the new things that haven't been published yet. We're learning about papers, well, work that hasn't even become a paper yet, that we might want to see become a paper and submitted to us. So this is how we do it. And it's how we keep on top of the field and say, oh, this can remember maybe about 2.5 years ago, I saw a reignition of the fight for working memory and neural representations of working memory. And I noticed that because it kept coming up at every conference I was going to within the same year. And I brought that back to the team and told them about it. And I said, this is something we need to look out for now. Watch it, because I think people are starting to do this. And sure enough, a whole lot of working memory papers 2.0 came out. So this is what we do. We keep close ties to the community and then report back to the team. So all of us are aware of it. And to jump onto something that came up at the lunch discussion before this talk, we focus on the significance of the research. We do not care who it comes from, where it comes from, whether we think something is going to get a lot of citations, because we care more about, is it important for our audience, for the field that we cover in our journal, right? We don't pay attention to possible media coverage. I put the parentheses in social media, right? Because now everyone is tweeting threads about their paper, or especially if it's a bioarchive. Someone asks me, or inevitably, every time I give this talk, do you watch Twitter? I do. Does that influence whether or not we want a paper? I think because of the pandemic, this is our only entryway into what's coming out on bioarchive and other preprint servers. But just because a paper has 300 retweets does not mean it's a paper that we want, because you can imagine that there are social bubbles, right? And it's just, I saw this paper and then a friend of that person retweets the paper. It doesn't mean anything about the strength of the science and the importance of that question. So we really only care about the question and how it fits with what we know of our journal and the soundness of the research before we go any further. Okay, so things that could apply to you even now as you're finishing up your PhDs or after you finished is, as manuscript editors, we get to see the latest primary research, as I said, at conferences or at lab visits like this. We know the newest stuff coming out. We have to think on our feet at these conferences. Is this something that we want? Does it fit with the journal? We have to kind of make that decision pretty quickly, or at least say, can you send it to us? I think I'd like to take a closer look and I'd like to discuss it with my team. Because I'll say it now, because I think I only said it at lunch, we keep each other in check, right? So if there's a paper I'm really excited about, but it probably isn't right for the journal, then my teammates will come in and go, yes, but this, or no, but that. Or they'll do something, they'll bring in a paper and everyone is negatively disposed to it. And I will go, no, but wait, there's something interesting. And it's far afield from my area of expertise. But if I'm interested in it, it might have a bigger shot at being broadly applicable to Nature Neuroscience, which publishes all of neuroscience, not just one subset, right? Not cognitive neuro only, not circuits only. And that speaks to not only networking with the science community, because you have to think like that, you have to be able to have a conversation about decision making, as well as social neuroscience, visual, auditory, all of this stuff. You have to be able to hold your own and be willing to say, I don't know about it, why don't you tell me about it, right? So that speaks to the last point, which is you get exposed to a lot of things. I cover 2/3 of the scope, from circuits neuroscience all the way up to just pure modeling papers, cog, social, systems, all of it in between. And I wasn't trained by that. There's one person here that I know speaks to that because he knew me when I was a grad student. So, you know, instead of being an inch wide when you finish your PhD, you are the expert on that, and a mile deep, right? You've researched everything, you've done 5 or more years of the literature, you've done all this work. You're now the other way. You are a mile wide and only an inch deep. This is why we don't review papers, right? We can only assess the technical rigor of something to an extent, knowing what we've learned from peer review of other papers like it, and seeing what we see at conferences. We have to rely on experts to tell us whether it really is technically sound. Okay. As an ex-scientist, you can turn off your computer at the end of the day and be done. You can say, I'm only going to read 3 papers, or something happened, we had too many meetings, I'm only going to read 2 papers and be done with it. You can have relatively instant gratification that way. You finish your to-do list. You don't have to worry about waiting for 6 months to get enough data to support your conclusions. The hours can be generally shorter if you exercise your willingness to have a better work-life balance. But we are all ex-scientists, so it took me a very long time to not do that, to not work and answer emails at 11 o'clock at night. But you can do it because you have the ability to do so in this job. The time pressure is greater because you get so many submissions. And if I can get through 3 new submissions a day, that's good. Now that means reading 3 new papers front to back, the cover letter, writing up my notes, potentially consulting with other people on the team, and sending that decision letter. Then that's great. Why? Because I've got other papers further along in the pipeline, finding reviewers, chasing reviewers, writing up the reviews, going through someone's revision for accept or for going back to the reviewers. A lot of it has to happen within a 7 to 8 hour day. And then I have a team with 2 people in London. So if I want their specific expertise, I better get it done before 12 noon, or I'm gonna have to wait another day. So that's where the time pressure comes in. You have to now answer to a corporate environment. So as much as you want to be able to be a supporter of open science, code sharing, data sharing, gender diversity, racial, ethnic diversity, you have to answer to an entire corporate structure where things are much slower because you have to climb up the ranks to get someone's attention and then enact it into something that the rest of us can say that we're doing. So that has to be something you can take into consideration if you work as an editor. And instead of only focusing on making sure that your claims are well supported by your data, you also need to make sure that you're communicating them as accessibly and as clearly as possible so that it can get more eyes on it. I'm not talking about citations. I'm just talking about getting other people interested in your work, because that's important to a lot of people, whether it's a journal editor, a faculty hiring committee person, all of that stuff, granting agencies, that's important. And so we step in and we say, I like your paper. I don't think it's going to do well in review until you rewrite something. And I have done that. I have actually sent a paper back and said, I'm going to review it, but rewrite this first, please. Okay, so things that we do, we read new manuscripts. That's the bread and butter of the journal editing job. With more experience, you'll get to see more papers outside of your scope. So I came in as the cog neuro editor. I was given primarily cognitive neuroscience papers and some systems dealing with non-human primates. And then once I got more comfortable, then they started to broaden my scope. They would give me modeling papers. They would give me circuit papers or cellular and molecular papers or genetics papers. So it's just to make sure that you're applying the same kind of standards in cog neuro that you would at a circuits level. I'm talking really high level. What's the question? Is it interesting? What did they do? What did they find? Did they answer the question? Is it important beyond the immediate field that this work speaks to, right? And that's why we consult with other editors on these decisions. Past the decision to go out to review, we consult with each other on the appropriate reviewers. What have the reviewers said? What do we do forward? Is this something we want back? We even consult before we go to review. I'm not sure. What do you think about this paper? So that's the bulk of the day. This can happen switching every hour on the hours to a different paper, sometimes every 30 minutes. And then you also do the really large task of going through the final revisions before you hit accept and send it off to production. So let me break this down a little further. And now, for those of you that are interested in this kind of job, think about everything that I've said, what your skills are as you're becoming a scientist. You are a scientist, excuse me, as you're finishing your PhD. Think about the things that come into play that don't call upon what you're doing right now to finish your PhD, right? So you get a paper that the author submits to the journal. It is the chief editor that assigns at Nature Neuroscience the papers to the editors that are in the office. So for today, because I'm here with all of you, my papers that would normally get assigned to me are now going off to other editors. So they need to be well informed about what my criteria are or what I would be interested in, what I have set as the bar for Cogneuro to process that paper. This is why we work really strongly together as a team. So the papers get assigned to the editors. The editors will make the first decision, review or not. And if they don't know, they will consult with the rest of us. So I've also told my team that I have a break at this time. If you need my opinion, I will log on and I will look at it and I will sign off. So I'm doing double duty today. Okay, so we either reject it, desk rejection, and we can potentially get appeals for that. More often than not, more editors get appeals now than before at this first stage before peer review. We'll talk about appeals in a moment, but I'll just move through the whole pipeline. So peer review, as I said, find the reviewers, chase after them, then distill all of the reports with the same editors that you consulted at the beginning to see what do you think about these reviews. This is my impression, this is what I would do, but what do you think? And this is where it gets stuck, but I'll dive into that a little more in another slide. And then we make one of three decisions. The one on the bottom about accepting a paper is very rare after one round of review, unless it was reviewed elsewhere, like Nature or Nature Medicine, right? And it's just they want to find a better home. They've already redone it. Does it fit within Nature Neuroscience's scope? And sometimes we'll just go, yes, okay, fine, send it to us and we'll publish it. Or we'll send it one more time to the reviewers and that's it, accept. Okay, so there's papers for me at every stage of this pipeline. I have an appeal waiting for me from before review, so it is a desk rejection, and I have another appeal waiting for me after review. So it's already been 2 rounds of review, and that takes a lot of time because you have to sit through all of the arguments and then question yourself. Did you miss something? Did you make a mistake? Were we too hard? These are some of the things that come into consideration. And this is why you consult with your team on this. Not the whole 7-person team, but at least the chief and the ones that would be most pertinent for that area. Okay, any questions? I think we're gonna dive in further into details. Nope, okay. So when you first submit a paper, I used to not care about cover letters, but now I believe strongly in them because I've outlined that entire pipeline for you. This is your chance to get my attention because I'll outline what happens to me on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We have team meetings at 10 a.m. And by the time we're done, we're talking about really difficult decisions, or someone is appealing, or we're talking about the latest issue. My brain is a little fried by then. I'll look at my list of papers assigned to me and look at the cover letters in the abstract. And if the paper is really well described and makes me want to read that paper because it's intriguing and it's interesting, then I'll say, okay, that's next on my list. I'm gonna go and get a coffee or get lunch first, and then I will sit and I will read. It is what really catches my attention. That to say, don't oversell the paper, right? It is your elevator pitch, as the slide says. Give it a page. I think anything over a page, especially if it's single spaced, you're gonna lose my attention, especially if it's a brief communication. Because if your cover letter is almost as long as the paper itself, there's no point, right? And don't reiterate the abstract. Really, in normal language, explain why the paper is important. You can give reviewer suggestions there, you can give it in the system itself, but please don't recommend people that used to be in your lab, that was your supervisor, because we check that anyway. You can give us reviewer exclusions, we will honor them, up to 5. You can't tell me, don't sign on anyone that has ever done optogenetics with Carl Zatorre, because that won't work. It also won't work if you say anyone that believes that the area LIP does this. That also won't work. 5 people. Mention whether there are related papers from your group or elsewhere that you know is being submitted and could be potential pressure to get your paper out there, or if it's the same data set. Make sure that there isn't an overlap too great that could disqualify your paper, because there is a dual submission policy in play. You cannot submit a paper at Nature Neuroscience and also submit it to Nature Human Behavior at the same time. Once you submit, that is it until we finish it with a decision. Okay. Celebrity endorsements. This person came to my poster and they loved it, or this person heard my talk and said that you should submit it here. That doesn't work with us either, because while they may review for us, or maybe they don't, it is us to make the decision, and then the weight of that name means nothing to us. Okay, so once it's assigned, as I said, I read it, the cover letter front to back, and weigh it against what I know the journal would like in that specific area. And we'll consult with the team to keep each other in check. We do this within 7 to 10 days. This is where the time pressure comes in. 3 papers a day, try to get that decision out there, because we try to make sure you can move on. This is a year or more of your work. You don't deserve to sit there for 2 weeks just to get told, no, we're not sending it out to review. It happens though. Yeah, I see it, Heather. It happens because, especially even with us who are doing full-time editing, I can tell you this year we lost an editor for 4 months because of maternity leave. Another one went to go work for Nature temporarily and is still at Nature because someone there went on extended leave. I was in and out because I had a death in the family 3 months ago. And so everyone was covering my work. So we're all piled up. Everything slows it down. So it used to be initial decisions within 7 days. That is still how we're aiming for. I deliberately say 10 days now, because the weekend factors into this. If you submit on a Friday afternoon, that clock is still ticking on us the minute it's assigned. So if I can't get to you until the 2 Mondays afterwards, that's 10 days. So keep that in mind, even though we try to get it to you quickly. What are we looking for? As I said, how does the paper fit within what we know of the scope to be? How important will it be to people beyond your specific field? And is it valid? Is your claim actually, if you said something like, we did this intervention in this group and we know that it improved this, did you have a control group to show that it was really because of your intervention? or your task design or whatever you're doing. That's the level to which we go. You can't make that claim because you don't have the evidence to support it, and then we reject it. Anything else nitty-gritty, like, is that the right viral construct for this particular optogenetic protocol? That's not something we're going to reject a paper for. That's what we need the experts for, okay? Other things, that's great that you can say this, these set of correlations show the associations between this connectivity pattern and this behavior. Great. Or, but what does that mean now? Because we can all do that. Does it mean anything about how we understand the brain? Not sure. The exception here is when it speaks to more about biomarkers and disease, right? That's impossible. That's a hard goal to attain. So now you see the variability by which we start to assess these things, and this is why we start consulting with each other, right? You have a large data set. You tell me that you've accrued all of these data to answer this question, but is that question interesting to us, or is the data set more interesting to us? Then we might say, you have submitted it as an article. We might see it better as a resource or as a tech report because your methods are really cool. Maybe we'll reframe things like that instead, and we'll ask you if that's okay. Okay? So this is the flexibility that I talked about in terms of the lunch, where we can't be set in stone about this is how a paper is, this is the format it's going to be. We need to just see the importance of the science itself before we move forward with the decision. Okay, so a lot of this is repetitive now. A strong contender for peer review isn't important for other people beyond your question. Is the design strong enough to support the important claims that you're making? Can you rule out some other explanations already? It doesn't have to be perfect at that point, because that's what peer review is for. But if we as editors can say, but did you control for this, or did you control for that to support your claims and your interpretation? If we see something wrong, that's a problem already. Okay.
Jean?
Yes.
Could you talk more about the volume of manuscripts that you get and how that might vary across different editors or even across the year?
It's hard because of the pandemic right now, but before the pandemic, my understanding was that the journal would get an average of maybe 200 to 300 papers every month, I think. I know that on a normal, in the middle of a year, I tend to get 2 to 3 new papers every day. So if so times that by 8. If 8 of us well, really 7, because the chief doesn't handle as many papers as we do. But so 7 of us times 3 by the end of the week, right? Got 21 papers just one day times 5 business days just per week, and then stretch that across. And then that doesn't count the higher numbers of increase submissions for it's an NIH deadline, it's SFN, it's this conference, and then you've got it. So maybe 200 to 300 per month, maybe. Could be off right now.
You don't have to answer this, but I'm just kind of curious. Do you think that the volume of papers that you get at any given time affects your decision making? I mean, like if you're under like a huge load, are you more likely to kind of skim and,
No.
more often?
No, I think the only thing it would do is cause me to slow down. So that's where the 7 to 10 days come into play. Even if a paper from the cover and from the abstract look like it doesn't fit in our scope, we still read it. We still read it to make sure. So I could say that I think that paper is one better off for communications bio, but I'll read it and it turns out that sometimes it's not. It turns out it's actually better, but the cover letter did a disservice, and so did the abstract. It'll just take longer. Yeah. I've pretty much covered everything in this slide, maybe a few times now. So I'll just move on. Things that we reject at the desk rejection level without peer review. If it is out of journal scope, let me unpack that for a moment, because I know that everyone has seen those letters with that templates text. Journal scope is obviously relative per journal. So imagine Nature Neuroscience, right? The further you go into the details of sensory stimulus, and that is what your paper is about. It is mapping of orientation versus color versus rectilinear features versus frequency of a grading or something. That is not of interest to a journal that publishes for all of neuroscience, right? It's of interest to the visual field, but not the rest of the field. Same can go for auditory. If you can't pull yourself away from Levelt's theory of linguistics, or you dive way too deep into phonological things like frequency and all that other stuff, they're not going to understand it or will care about it. So journal scope really does mean, can this be of interest to other fields besides yours, at least for Nature Neuro? Similar findings in the published literature. So this is where salami slicing comes into play. If we published a paper, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to publish the next paper that speaks to the same thing or adds on to it. If it is the next logical step for the paper that we published, then that probably is more of a Nature Communications paper than it is for us. If papers were already in press before the paper was submitted, and this is where it's a little unfair, but if I know that I'm publishing a paper soon on topic X, and then here comes a paper on topic X, you wouldn't have known that, but you've been scooped, right? This is where bioRxiv helps a little bit in terms of getting your stuff out there, but let me say this clearly. Depositing on bioRxiv and saying that a paper in bioRxiv scoops your paper, that does not happen. It does not happen because the paper has not come out, right? We don't know where this bioRxiv paper is. But if I know that I've hit accept on a paper that is exactly the same as yours, I know for sure you've been scooped. As I've said before, you're making claims that aren't supported by the data that you've put in the paper or the analysis that you run. If I have a problem with the way that you run this study with regards to ethics, nope, that's just a no-go. And then functional essential criteria, sufficient advance, that speaks to, again, what is already out there in the published literature, or functional relevance. This is all about, let's say, oscillation, right? You've got theta, gamma coupling, all of this other stuff, but I don't know how that relates to what makes the organism do in terms of behavior. Then what you have is basically a descriptive account of what happens in the brain, but we don't know what it all means. And that's important to us. Okay. Right. So every single research paper, whether it be an article, brief communications, tech report, resource, is peer reviewed. There's nothing that doesn't just go straight to accept. We consult with each other and make sure we have the right expertise if possible. Sometimes we have to let it go at 2 reviewers because we just cannot find things, and the clock is always ticking on that person's paper. We really don't want to have you wait for more than 2 months on a paper. So it's just not fair. You need to go if it doesn't work out so that you can get it published as quickly as possible. We will ask for advice on the technical rigor of the work and the conceptual aspects of the work, but we, the editors, are the ones that make the decision on whether or not the advance is enough. We do not, it's on another slide, but I'll say it now. We do not count votes. If there's 2 for and 1 against, or the other way around, that does not factor into our decision. It is the merit of the critiques that influence whether or not we decide to invite a revision or accept at that point. We can overrule. We have overruled on many times. Like sometimes someone says something so damning on a technical ground when the other 2 reviewers have passed it that we go, we can't. But then if we're not sure, this is where the last bullet line comes in. We start playing around with the peer review. We'll consult with them, something like eLife, just keeping the reviewers anonymous instead. If we're not sure about something that one reviewer has raised, we will ask the other 2 to step in, or at least 1. Say, what do you think about this person's comments? Does it change your opinion on the paper? Do they need to address this if we invite a revision? Stuff like that. But we keep them anonymized to protect the reviewers. And other journals in the family, Nature Communications, Nature, we now publish reviewer names with their consent. I think Nature Communications publishes the reviews anonymized. And if it's both, then they're not matched up. I don't know if that's completely true, so don't hold me to that. But I don't believe it's like eLife where someone's name, if that's correct, like name is attached to a review. Okay. Peer reviewers. So we know that it takes a time to develop your reviewing skills. And so when I sign on a new person for our journal, we keep an eye on how they do. You know, how well are they grounded in the technical expertise of the paper, knowledge of the field? Can they do it constructively? Are we sure that they haven't co-authored a paper with them within 3 years or less? Are they giving grand sweeping statements about the paper itself and the question rather than actually looking at the work? Or vice versa. They're only looking at the details, but can't give us a feeling about whether or not we should publish the paper. That comes with time. Would I love to give every reviewer some feedback on it? I would, but as you can see now, I don't have a lot of time for that. But that's why we share the reviewer report, so you can see how someone else does it, and then you can try to learn from it. Why did the editors make the decision based on the reviewers' comments on that? And then you can always reach out to me if I was the handling editor and like, can you explain to me why that happened? And people have. They've told me that they felt overlooked or they don't understand what we're doing this or something like that. And that's okay. Like I can try to explain a little more why we made a decision, even for the reviewer. To speak to something that I had said just before the talk began, we are actively seeking to increase the diversity in the reviewer pool. Gender, geographical, racial, and ethnic. It's slow, but we are actively trying to do that, and that's across the board, not only at Nature Neuro, but at other journals too. As I said, we honor within reason author exclusion, reviewer exclusions. I need to change that slide. Up to 5. We will involve as many as we need. We will try to get 3. Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 4, just because we want to make sure we have every aspect weighed in. And sometimes it's 4 because we've put on a brand new reviewer that's never reviewed for us, and we want to weigh that person against someone who is familiar with our standards to see how they do. And that's how we assess a reviewer's performance. If we see a reviewer say something inappropriate, if their tone is destructive or obstructive, and I've seen it before, I will say, I think we need to give this person a break. Or this person will immediately trigger an appeal because of their tone. And so we need to prepare for it now if we decide to reject the paper. And then I will say, let's take a break from this person for a while, just so that it's not too much, right? Or if they don't appreciate that technique, we know not to sign on that person for technique. Right, said this already. It's not 2 versus 1. We go with the 2. We consider the arguments. We overrule in either direction. We decide, especially now during the pandemic, what requests for new experiments are feasible. So this is, I think, where we've fallen at Nature Neuroscience, not necessarily everything. If the main claims of the paper cannot be supported with the data that already exist, and you cannot go and get new data now, that paper will likely be rejected because the paper itself is not strong enough. If it's just new analyses with data you might already have, that has a better chance. Like we know we cannot force people to go out there and get new data if the pandemic is preventing you from doing that. So that's where we kind of hold the bar now until things change. Sometimes it turns out that the authors already have the data and they just didn't include it in, then okay. Then we can talk about that, right? Then appeal. All right, transfers, okay. So you can transfer at both rejection points. If I reject it before peer review and after peer review. Now, things to know when you transfer, if you use that transfer link at the bottom of my decision letter, they will see the decision letter written by me. They will see the rationale if I describe it, why we rejected the paper, if it's before review. They know to look for clues. If I put a link specifically pointing to another journal in the family, that means I think it's suitable for that journal. And then if it goes to that journal, let's say Nature Communications, they will look at it and go, why did she think that that was right for us? And then they will make their independent decision, but it will make them realize that I thought it was something good. So they'll pay attention to that. Same thing happens with Nature sending us a transfer link pointing to us. So I'll go, why did that person think it was good for us? They could be wrong, right? But it will make me look closer. If it is post-review and you hit that link, the reviewer identities and the reviewer reports will automatically be transferred with your paper. You have a chance to revise it and upload a rebuttal to the reviewer reports before you finish the submission to the receiving journal of the transfer. But know that you might be beholden to that reviewer panel for the end of the process at the new journal. If you think that you want a fresh start, the bottom point on this slide, you don't want that same reviewer panel, don't transfer. Submit it fresh, be done with it. Okay? Because you can't you could, no one's telling you not to transfer a paper with the reviews and then ask for an entire reviewer panel, but you can ask that, just know that it probably won't happen. The editor might add a new reviewer. I've done that. If I think that a paper from Nature wasn't assessed on some aspect, or Nature Biotech or Nature Medicine, and I want someone to weigh in on that, I will agree to send it back to the reviewers and tell the authors now, I will add a new reviewer for something else. So it's really, if you want a fresh start without any input from the previous editor at the previous journal, the previous reviewers, don't use the transfer link at all. Submit fresh. Okay? And that is your call. That's your decision. You also have the option to allow us to consult with other journals. So when you submit to us, there is something that you can opt out. You have to opt out of it to say, we don't want you to open a consultation session where now a potential receiving journal editor can see all of your files, can see all of the reviewer reports, can see all of that. You can stop us from doing that. Or you can just let it be. And then if I decide to consult with someone else, I will. But either way, even if you opt out, you can still use a transfer link, transfer it on your own without consulting with me further or asking. Okay? Any questions about that part? All right. So I think that's basically the end of the publishing process here. So main takeaways, get your main message across, your cover letter, your abstract, your introduction, because keep in mind that if I'm doing this with all of you today, people are handling cogneuro papers without me, right? If you can convince them when they don't deal with this work on a regular basis that this is important, that's great. So you want to really make it as accessible and as clear as possible to show that the question is important, that the findings are important. Once it's assigned, I am going to guide you, or my colleagues are going to guide you all the way through. If you have questions about it, you can reach out to us. Please do not, and I've seen this happen before, they didn't like that I rejected a paper, or not me. A newer part of our team, relatively new to the journal, they rejected a paper. Then that author sees me at a conference, talks to me about it, and says, well, you see the point, right? You can talk to that editor and convince him or her to change her mind. Or they'll do one more and just go straight to the chief and kind of report us to them. The chief will bounce you right back to your handling editor. And so will I. So keep that in mind. It's just that if I was assigned your paper, I am your editor until the end of it. And that's it. We don't care about where the paper comes from, which lab it comes from. We look at the science and the questions of your papers. And we can see the potential if we send it to review. We know we'll pick the reviewers that will ask for this because we have a question about that, and hope that they pick up on that. Or we'll ask them, do you think that that's okay? Do you think that that set of analysis is strong enough? I have done that, definitely, and they'll answer the question. We take the ultimate responsibility for decisions. We want to improve it. We will help you through the revision process. So please reach out to us if you have any questions about a comment that a reviewer has made and it's not clear. And you have options beyond Nature Neuroscience if you want to try some of the other journals that are out there. So now that you've seen a little bit what we do every day and sometimes every hour, there's other things besides that. So before the pandemic, everyone at Nature Neuroscience was expected to go to 4 to 5 conferences a year and do 2 to 3 visits to a department like this, and keep on top of the literature. So the best way to do that is really to subscribe to the table of contents of our competitor journals and above and below, and just see what's happening. And we have regular meetings talking about what other papers are out there that we might need to pay attention to further. Beyond that, then there are also special projects. So one is a focus issue. So in March 2017, I created a focus on human brain mapping. And I originally recruited 12 pieces for that, and only 7 of them made it. But imagine you're dealing with your research manuscript load plus wrangling all the authors for 12 pieces. That's where the time pressure comes in too, right? You can contribute to some projects of improving peer review, data code transparency, speak on panels about publishing like this or career development. I've definitely led panels at what can you be with a PhD, something like that a few years ago, and led an entire editorial publishing panel for that. You give master classes on how to better write your papers so that they're clearer. You can help develop a nature conference on topic X. So I did that for Toronto maybe 2 years ago now. So these are a lot of the things, and these contribute to developing a portfolio of your footprint in the field. You've done this focus. You know this field because you've done this. You've created a conference. It shows that you've got ownership over the areas that you handle, and you become more recognized in the field. I think to this day now, because of the human brain mapping focus in March 2017 and the fact that I keep going to OHBM, people from the COBIDAS committee know straight to come to me immediately. They just reach out and go, oh, hey, we've got this new committee forming. Do you think you might be interested in something? Or that is after 5.5 years of work of just constantly going to conferences and convincing them we care about cogneuro. Please come back with your best stuff, right? Administrative things, worrying about the issue, what papers get in. I am in charge of the cover image every month. It's just stuff like that, but it's fun and it gets you out of the grind of pushing papers through every part and chasing reviewers and all that stuff. You think about papers that you accepted and think of the right person to highlight it in news and views, and then you get to work with that person to write a great piece in plain language, why people should be excited about that paper. You think about the meetings you want to go to next year. Think about ideas that you saw at conferences for great perspective articles, reviews, comments, and you train new people that come through. Because a lot of this is implicit learning, a lot of it. And then sometimes you lead communities of similar themed editors. Like there's a neuroscience community of editors across all the journals. And I've led a community on complexity. So that includes network science, network neuroscience, dynamics, all of that stuff. And that's where I got to interface with physics editors, biotech editors. You get to meet other people and learn more about that stuff and take it to your journal and apply it there. So this is a lot of the things that you can do as an editor, at least at Nature Research. Okay, last few minutes. If you might be a good editor if you really enjoy science, but not so much the experiments, or in my case, worrying about whether or not I can get funding to run a lab for those experiments. If you like reading, I don't, but it's a job. It's part of my job. I was never an avid reader when it came to this stuff, but it is integral to this part. If you like writing, if you like talking about science, if you like interacting, that is actually my strong point, is finding out the new stuff, talking to people in conferences and getting new things to come to the journal. And if you'd like professional stability, this is my job until I no longer want it. You finish the probation period of a few, like 6 months or so, and you show that you can take the training wheels off and do this on your own, handling papers through the whole pipeline, unless you do something egregiously wrong in terms of author interactions, reviewer interactions, editorial interactions, this is your job for as long as you want it. You have stability. Right. I think I said most of this already. Manuscript tests, this changes and it's different across all the journals, but if you want to become an editor, I would suggest reading papers outside of your field now to understand and distill why did they ask that question, why is it important, what they find, did they answer it, and who will be most receptive to that answer and to those findings. And the last 2 points on this, ambassador for journal, good team member, that comes with training. So I don't think you have to worry about it. You don't have to be outgoing. You don't even have to be extroverted. I am not. But this is just something that you do. You learn it on the job because it's part of your job. So in the last few minutes, this is what you see on a CV or on whatever website is out there now, right? Neuro all the way through, lots of research experience, but okay, I did an undergraduate project in visual psychophysics, did not like it. Then I became a resident, a research assistant in 2 labs, one in infant cognition and a clinical department at Beth Israel here in New York for dementia, elderly dementia. And that's what got me into McGill. I originally was supposed to do neuropsychopharmacology work for schizophrenia, genetic factors. And then I became allergic to my mice. Then I can't do that for another 3 years. So I found my way into a PhD lab at the MNI, completely switched, and decided to do auditory cognitive neuroscience, human subjects, fMRI, something that spoke closer to my personal experience outside of science. And I did a postdoc back here in New York, where I also learned MEG and more auditory psychophysics, so that I had a broader scope of things besides audio-motor integration, which is what I did for my PhD. Okay, so all that to say, before I talk about what else is out there, is you don't have to have a one track, right? You can meander, but the cover letter now it's not only for your selling your paper, pitching your paper, it's pitching you as a person. I was able to say, I did all of this, and I took different bodies of literature, was able to distill it to form a new question and design an experiment around it. That contributes to how I stand out when I just send a CV like everybody else. It shows I'm flexible, that I can learn quickly, that I am adaptive, right? Think of those things as you start to look for jobs, whether it be professors, whether it be consulting, my job, what have you. So positions are always advertised on Nature Jobs. There are at least two openings for Nature Review Psychology. It's a new journal that is launching in, oh goodness, 2022, I think. But they're hiring now because they will start taking and commissioning pieces as of January 2021. The ad will close next Friday. So if you know anyone that's finishing their PhD, someone that's just interested, and point them to the ad on Nature Research or naturejobs.com, since they've got a week to apply. You can be a manuscript editor like me. You can be a magazine editor, as I said, more about the news pieces, do reviews, journals. You can be a copy editor with a PhD. And you can do production or art if you want. After this job, I know I'm over time, sorry. There is something else after this job. People can stay here until they retire. They can move to other publishing houses, Cell Press, Rockefeller U. They can do book editing. I became a medical writer for 4 months when I did a temporary stint as this position, covering for the permanent cognitive editor who was on mat leave and then came back. So I was a medical writer for 4 months. You can do more science journalism because now you've got a wide network of people to reach out to for comments on developments. And the more traditional routes are to do research administration. So that means you go back into executive positions and take care of an entire department or multiple departments, but from higher up. Or you can go back into research. There are many editors I know now that have left after 2 years, gone back to do a postdoc, and are now just going to become true academics. So you can do that again. You're not closing the door forever. And that's it. Sorry, I've run over time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jean.